Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom opens up like any other episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. Our porous protagonist is awoken by his comically large alarm clock, proclaiming that today is the day he'll finally get his boating license. Little did SpongeBob know of the horrors that lie ahead. The fear and anxiety he would experience as everything he ever knew and loved was robbed from him. The anguish of having to end the lives of his own dear friends, and the sacrifices that would be necessary in order to save Bikini Bottom. Did SpongeBob get horrifically jump scared before being viciously torn to shreds by Mrs. Puff? That's whoa, dude. I grew up watching SpongeBob SquarePants, so when one of my channel members informed me of a horror-themed SpongeBob fan game, I was immediately interested. It isn't often that someone takes a beloved children's franchise as big as SpongeBob and twists it into a disturbing, terrifying reflection of its former self. Don't get me wrong, mascot horror has become really popular lately. The tremendously popular Five Nights at Freddy's series is basically a dark adaptation of a Chuck E. Cheese creepypasta. Tattletale was about evil Furbies. Poppy Playtime's designs always reminded me of the Muppets, only they're evil versions of the Muppets that are trying to devour your flesh or whatever. Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom is different though. It's a fan-made SpongeBob horror game. While a game like FNAF is obviously based on Chuck E. Cheese, it doesn't literally take place at a Chuck E. Cheese. It's Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Tattletale isn't a Furby, it's a Tattletale or whatever. These games are all obviously derivative of famous family-friendly franchises, but they distort them just enough to avoid running afoul of any actual intellectual property laws. However, unlike these other horror game properties, Bikini Bottom is a fan game, and thus is able to utilize the licensed SpongeBob characters, voice clips, plot points, and everything. This sets it apart from most other games in the subgenre. It's able to play on our nostalgia for the series directly. The result is something uniquely horrifying. SpongeBob heads out to practice for his boating exam when his neighbor Patrick stops him and asks if the two can go catch jellyfish. SpongeBob agrees, and the tutorial level commences. Immediately, we can tell something is off. The music is incredibly ominous and foreboding, and even as SpongeBob performs some light platforming before frolicking in the fields and catching jellyfish, you can't help but feel like something absolutely terrible is about to happen. Also, Patrick is following you throughout, so every time you turn around, he's just standing there. Like Slender Man, only minus the slender part since it's, Patrick. We run into Squidward practicing his clarinet before completing a jellyfish catching minigame. We pass by some fishing lures before the game gives us our first indication that something is not quite right. While navigating through some tall seaweed, the following prompt appears. Remember to keep an ear out, not all surprises are friendly. SpongeBob and Patrick run into Mr. Krabs, who asks them to help him retrieve some treasure hidden nearby. The two agree, and the horror truly begins. This monstrosity of a jellyfish is guarding the chest, and we need to grab it and escape without being caught. One of the places that Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom excels is in its presentation and its visual design. It looks pretty on point considering it's a 3D adaptation of a hand-drawn 2D cartoon. It obviously doesn't look as good as the official licensed SpongeBob games like Battle for Bikini Bottom, let alone that game's absolutely gorgeous remake. However, it still looks really nice, and it's especially impressive considering it was all made by a small team of volunteers. With that, SpongeBob's harrowing journey begins. 9 p.m. Glove World. Patrick and Squidward are at the theme park, excited to attend Squidward's clarinet performance. Squidward is busy preparing in a trailer out back when Mr. Krabs interrupts him with a phone call. The greedy owner of the Krusty Krab is concerned that something smells fishy, but Squidward isn't hearing it. He's too fixated on his upcoming recital. It is at this precise moment that everything goes to shit. When Patrick comes to, a psychotic, monstrous version of Glovey has kidnapped SpongeBob and is fleeing the park. We chase after them, all the while avoiding falling debris, exploding minecarts, and stinging jellyfish. Undeterred, Patrick chases the two into the Tunnel of Glove. With the action sequence over, the horror truly begins. As Patrick, we navigate the dark, spooky tunnels, all the while being stalked and harassed by Glovey. This sequence is honestly really intense, as are many throughout the game. The enemies patrol around, and you're inevitably going to run into them at times. When you do, the music cranks to 11, the screen goes crazy, and all you can do is run like hell and hope that you're able to give them the slip. When caught, the resulting jump scares are some of the most intense I've ever encountered. They're way scarier and more intense than those of Five Nights at Freddy's security breach, for instance. In Bikini Bottom, enemies have a short, narrow line of sight, so when they do spot you, they're close, and things can go from 0 to 100 fast. You often don't have a chance to anticipate the jump scare ahead of time, and that makes them all the more effective. Patrick is caught by Glovey and awakens in a cell. The next section of the game is weird. You're given a map and forced to navigate through a series of trapped rooms, all the while watching your back for 2 versions of Glovey. To stop them, you have to shine your flashlight on them, but like one of them also disables your flashlight. I don't know. The mechanic wasn't really clear, and I just sort of found the exit haphazardly whilst wandering around. While the chase sequence in the Tunnel of Love are an excellent start to this game, the maze is not an especially good level. It's a shame it occurs so early on because I bet a lot of people quit playing the game at this point. After escaping, SpongeBob and Patrick regroup and witness the carnage firsthand. Bikini Bottomites are being carried away in cocoons. Citizens are becoming jellyfish-eyed clones, and worst of all, both Gloveys have cornered our heroes. It appears that all hope is lost when suddenly, from the shadows, a hero emerges. Squidward uses his Suds gun to destroy the right Glovey before leading SpongeBob and Patrick to safety. At the end of each mission, the player is given a rank. In addition to simply surviving and completing the level, there are optional objectives contained within. Golden spatulas hidden in out-of-the-way places reward exploration, and bonuses for completing levels faster than a set par time give the game some replayability. It'd be impressive enough if these things weren't added, and it's cool that the developers took the time to work these extra challenges into the game. It almost reminds me of the classic Tony Hawk's Pro Skater style missions. The game's plot is linear. It starts at 9 p.m. and each level represents 1 hour of time passing. At some points, the game branches into multiple paths with different characters tackling different levels at the same time. In this case, Mr. Krabs, as well as Squidward, SpongeBob, and Patrick arrive at their homes with the goal of quickly grabbing their belongings before meeting up at the Krusty Krab. I tackled Mr. Krabs' level first. After verifying that his daughter Pearl is safe, the player must collect 18 bundles of cash distributed in random locations throughout the house. Unfortunately, Pearl begins to sleepwalk, and the player must avoid her, as well as remaining quiet by dodging obstacles strewn throughout the house. This mission is fun, but it's cruel. It's intense, and dodging Pearl is fun and ridiculous, but the addition of a jellyfish that one shot kills you seems a little mean when the death can potentially mean losing minutes of progress. That's actually going to be a trend in this game. After obtaining all the cash, we head to the basement and obtain a mayonnaise minigun. For those unaware, mayonnaise is the solution to all problems in the SpongeBob universe. Upon heading upstairs, Mr. Krabs encounters Pearl one last time, and tragically, he is forced to gun down his own daughter. As he heads back to the car, Mr. Krabs tragically clutches a locket containing a photo of Pearl before driving off to the Krusty Krab. The camera pans down, revealing that he has left all the money behind. Meanwhile, SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward have their own terrors to face. Squidward must traverse his house and retrieve his artwork, his clarinet, Squidward's prized possessions. However, he's hunted by a monstrous jellyfish, and some of the objects severely reduce Squidward's movement speed, requiring you to rely on stealth mechanics. If you've enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing. Thanks. Thankfully, there is a checkpoint halfway through this mission, and once you learn the layout of the house, it's pretty straightforward. Squidward, this is the shit you save? At the end, the power goes out, and you're forced to navigate in the dark and without the assistance of the elevator. This isn't too much more difficult though, and Squidward is able to make it out without much trouble, meeting up with Patrick at the vehicle. Around the clock at Bikini Bottom feels like a licensed product. It feels like all of this could have happened in an actual SpongeBob episode, and it makes the disturbing story and gameplay all the more unsettling. While it's a horror fan game and it clearly intends to startle and spook you, the sheer number of Easter eggs, references, callbacks, and other ties to the official SpongeBob series makes the whole thing feel really unnerving. These are the SpongeBob characters. This is Bikini Bottom. Squidward did just say that. Wait, what? At times, I had to actually remind myself that this wasn't an official game. The thought that some of these ideas might have actually been in the showrunners' heads during production of the Nickelodeon classic was just too weird and disturbing. When you're hours into a polished, official-looking product, it's easy to get creeped out when you open up Squidward's bedroom closet, only to find a loaded shotgun. Examining the shotgun triggers the following jump scare, obviously a reference to the famous SpongeBob creepypasta, Squidward's Soup. I was frustrated by SpongeBob's mission until I figured out the basic pathing for Doodlebob. Even then, it sort of felt like there were moments where Patrick could spawn in the worst possible spot, and you were either dead or had to wait like a minute for the cycle to come around again. Ultimately though, it's a cool level, and it's fun to see SpongeBob's house fully realized in 3D. Patrick heads to his rock home in order to retrieve his most prized possessions, his toys. However, while searching, he's dragged into the depths below, deep into his own imagination. This is where things start to get weird. Patrick must navigate through a dark physical manifestation of his own subconscious. He's hunted by various foes and sent through all sorts of surreal locations. It honestly reminded me of Eckercoaster's game Venge. The kelp dunes force us to navigate through a dark maze using audio cues to quickly turn and shine our flashlight on approaching enemies. These guys are horrifying. They scream so loudly, and it's quite disorienting. It makes it difficult to spot them. While the segment is not especially difficult, it's punishing, and one mistake will certainly lead to your death. After some mediocre first-person platforming, as well as a tutorial of Patrick's boxing mechanics, we escape back to the boatmobile, our precious toys in tow. SpongeBob and Squidward arrive with their respective belongings, and the three flee from their tormentors and head over to the Krusty Krab. Another few missions open up to us. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs put on disguises and head to Bargain Mart with the goal of buying as much mayonnaise as possible. You know, because mayonnaise stops the clones or solves the problems. I don't know, mayonnaise is the answer, that's all that matters. This is an easy level that's just first-person Pac-Man. It's a lot like Dark Deception or It Steals. You run around collecting all of the mayonnaise. Squidward's mission is much harder and much more complex. He and Patrick head to Tentacle Acres, the all-inclusive mini-community of obnoxious Squidward people. However, it's full of like massive gates and laser traps and bombs and stuff. The two must sneak through and complete a series of stealth segments and simple puzzles. It sort of reminds me of sneaking into the castle in Ocarina of Time. The actual puzzles are eh. Some are intuitive and feel satisfying when you pull them off, but others are obtuse and feel trivial. Thankfully, there's a fair number of checkpoints throughout the level, so it's not terribly unforgiving. The next segment is really cool. We reach a security office and Squidward needs to help Patrick navigate past a bunch of guards. It's a fun segment and I enjoyed it a lot. It's a good example of the sheer variety of gameplay that Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom provides. Patrick reaches the drain and dumps in the mayonnaise. Alarms go off and the two flee for their lives in this hilarious scene. This is amazing. The next segment has Squidward and Patrick running from a huge monster thing that I'm sure is from one of the SpongeBob episodes, while also dodging more security guards. Upon reaching the end, a boss fight initiates, and it's actually pretty good. We dodge some boulders as we hurl mayonnaise at the boss, which kills him. Of course mayonnaise kills him. Why would you ask? Have you been paying attention? Patrick and Squidward escape in a boatmobile, which Patrick apparently does know how to drive. Huh. Things have gotten pretty hectic at this point, and it's here that the true horror begins to emerge. Mrs. Puff's boating school has us controlling SpongeBob, and it starts off simple enough. You navigate through a large area, searching boats for the keys to the school. In addition to the usual guards and jellyfish, a large lighthouse rotates in the center of the area, and if it spots you for more than a few seconds, well... After finding the keys, we enter Mrs. Puff's school itself. For me, this is the moment that things took a turn for the worse. The mission's okay, and Mrs. Puff is actually quite intimidating. There are some genuinely tense moments. Apparently, she has captured some of the other students, and she intends to sacrifice them to her new overlord or something, I don't know. As SpongeBob, we need to navigate through the school 4 separate times as we safely escort the students to the exit. Whenever Mrs. Puff catches sight of you, this horrible noise plays, and yeah, like all the other enemies, you have to just run like hell and pray. It's better to not be caught in the first place. Unfortunately, Mrs. Puff's AI and pathing was just very obtuse for me, and it took a really long time to understand just what I could and couldn't get away with. It's not a bad mission, and replaying it, I don't have that much difficulty, but for some reason it just gave me so much trouble the first time around. The next mission is Goofy Goobers, which contains the hive of the jelly and threat. The design of this level is really something else. It continues to fit the show's aesthetic while at the same time effortlessly blending in the bizarre horror elements that the game so strongly evokes. The gameplay is fine too. The level feels quite large and open, but it's actually pretty linear, and figuring out where you need to go next is actually pretty straightforward for once. It helps that all the objectives glow like crazy, so you can see them from far away and vaguely know which direction you ought to be heading. Occasionally, a monster comes from behind you to jump scare you, but there's a pretty obvious audio cue, and flashing it with the camera causes its position to reset.
If you don't leave us alone, things are gonna get crazy.
After filling the jelly and hives with deadly mayonnaise, SpongeBob and Patrick decide to call upon the greatest heroes Bikini Bottom have ever known, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. However, upon arriving at Shady Shoals retirement home, our heroes encounter Dirty Bubble, a villain. He claims that he's been reformed and enlists our help in stopping Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, who have apparently teamed up with Man Ray. The implication here, by the way, is that these aren't the actual iconic characters for the series, they're just clones, but we don't see what happens to the originals, so yeah, just gonna skirt past that one. This level sucks. There's just no other way to say it. It's confusing, there's terrible direction, you can spend ages wandering around without making any progress, it just fucking sucks. It's horrible and I don't want to talk about it. The final boss at the end utilizes Patrick's first-person boxing mechanic, and while some of the early phases are interesting, the Dirty Bubble, who naturally betrays us, is just disgusting. It's a ton of trial and error to figure out what works and what doesn't in terms of avoiding his attacks, and at several moments I'd believed I'd figured out the working strategy, only to find that it wasn't consistent and could fail. Even worse, there's a whole other boss after this, and and if you die while learning their mechanics, the checkpoint starts you back off before the dirty bubble fight. Considering that fight takes forever and there's no real way to speed it up, it's pretty tiresome. Once you actually learn the mechanics of the Man Ray fight though, it's pretty cool. He baits you into attacking, then counterattacks, which you're supposed to block before launching your own barrage. However, there's no indication that you're supposed to block his counterattack. I was trying to evade it, which simply will not work. The boss requires experimentation, and considering you don't get a health refill between fights, there's a very good chance that players will die in their early attempts and be forced to refight the dirty bubble over and over again. Forcing the player to replay content that they've already completed in order to have an attempt at making progress is almost never a good design philosophy. Still looking at you, security breach post-game. Seriously, the Shady Shoals level is so abysmally bad, I suspect many players put the game down here. I wanted to. It's awful. Anyway, after Patrick beats everyone up, the group leaves, having accomplished nothing. This whole level was for nothing. We get a cutscene with Doodle Bob and Doodle Patrick again. These two have some of the funniest, best written dialogue in the game. It feels like it comes straight from the show, and the animations really sell it. Fortunately, after the worst level, we get one of the best. It's now 3 a.m. in Bikini Bottom, and it's time for 5 nights at the Krusty Krab. Obviously, this is not the FNAF X SpongeBob hybrid fan game series, but it does implement FNAF-style sit-and-survive mechanics into the existing first-person Unreal Engine template that the game uses. We play as Squidward, who must defend the Krusty Krab from the hash-slinging slasher, or a clone of the hash-slinging slasher, whatever. There are 4 possible entrances, and each produces a unique audio cue. When you hear the slasher at one entrance, you need to sprint there as quickly as possible and scare him away. If you let him in, well, you guessed it. This is actually a great level. It took me a few tries to get a sense of what the audio cues were, and the game throws some distractions your way that do a really good job of causing you to panic and lose focus on the cues that actually matter. However, once you get the hang of it, this level's quite fair, and the game slowly ramps up the difficulty on you as the night progresses. It's a simple level, but the gameplay really does work well, and as a FNAF fan, I really enjoyed it a lot. Aesthetically, it's also just really cool to see familiar SpongeBob locations like the Krusty Krab in these horror scenarios with the lights flickering, phones ringing. It's just off-putting and uncanny and weird, and I love it. The next level had Mr. Krabs wandering through this industrial site at 3 a.m. to take down a giant plankton. I'm not really sure what was going on here either, but the level itself has some really cool aesthetics. It's like downtown Bikini Bottom was swallowed into the depths of hell. There are some basic platforming sections, but most of this level is just a walking simulator. We then get to a boss fight with Plankton. It's okay. It's pretty spectacular in the sense that the giant plankton is walking around below you, and from the rooftops we need to use what I presume is more mayonnaise to damage him, but it's kind of basic. It's all very scripted, and most of the actual gameplay boils down to running around dodging jellyfish until you have another chance to damage Plankton. It looks cool though, lots of neat particle effects flying everywhere, environmental destruction, explosions, stuff like that. Finally, Mr. Krabs suddenly has his mayonnaise gun again, and we gun down the giant clone of Plankton. It's effortless, but it's cool. The next level is Larry the Lobster's Gym, which in my opinion is the best level in the game. It's pretty obvious what you need to do, and there are helpful signs placed throughout the vents showing you where to go for each objective. Without these decals, this level would have been unplayable. It'd be so bad. I feel like a lot of the other levels would have benefited from this level of direction. Little stuff like this that nudges the player in the right direction can go a long way to making games feel less frustrating, and this feels like the pinnacle of level design for Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom. It's fair, the challenges make sense, and the new ideas are introduced early on, which makes the deaths that inevitably result from experimentation far less punishing. Also, there's an Among Us reference.
Do you see a small vent on the floor? Have you ever heard of Among Us, SpongeBob? You need to vent. I know it'll be hard for you to be sus, but I know you can do it, SpongeBob.
Because of course there is. After SpongeBob pumps some iron and leaves Larry's gym, wait, did we accomplish anything in there? We return to the jellyfish fields from the game's tutorial. It turns out that the regal King Jellyfish has been dethroned by the evil Prince Jellian, and it's up to Patrick to stop him. This level looks really pretty. It honestly feels like something out of a Mario or Sonic game. It's linear, you climb a mountain, there are some boulders that roll down, kind of like Ocarina of Time's Death Mountain segment, and it's all pretty straightforward and fun. This level has a lot of secrets that reward exploration, which is always nice, especially when the level does such a great job inviting players to explore. Patrick reaches the top of the mountain and places mayonnaise into an exposed shower pipe. Mayonnaise kills the Jellians, and when Prince Jellian goes to shower, he's horrifically melted by the mayonnaise onslaught. And we're fighting a cow as Patrick. Okay, what? The old Bessie fight comes out of nowhere, and it's bad. It's just bad. There's nothing interesting to say about it. It sucks. After the fight, Mr. Krabs and Squidward arrive and escort Patrick to safety. Next, we go to Goo Lagoon, which is another maze-like fortress level. It's just another sequence of stealth challenges, but the scenery is all this drab sandcastle stuff. And as a result, this level is super unmemorable. It isn't especially fun or interesting to play, and it isn't interesting to look at. It feels like padding. At the end, Squidward finds a screwdriver. Right, that's why we came came all this way to find a goddamn screwdriver. Of course it's a goddamn screwdriver. The parallels to Security Breach really never end, do they? The next sequence has Squidward like breaking into the chum bucket and finding some more mayonnaise or something. I don't really understand the contrived plot reasons that were here. I assume the developers just made these assets and then crammed them into the plot as best as they could. That said, we're here, so let's make the best of it. The mission is pretty similar to the standard ones. Wander through a spooky place using stealth and agility to avoid some awful monster that wants to jump scare you. In Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom, the quest items can often appear in one of several places, and the enemy AI and pathing isn't fixed. Thus, you can't really plan out your routes through these areas that much, and completing the level basically comes down to trial, error, and luck. It's not especially interesting. The next section has Squidward navigating through the bar, avoiding patrolling enemies in one of the game's more polished stealth sections. There are a lot of unique assets created for this segment, and it's pretty detailed. After completing the objectives, the bandit dude shows up and sets the bar on fire. Wait, how did he set the bar on fire? They're under the sea. How can a bar that's under the ocean be so easily set on fire? Anyway, Squidward escapes from the flames, fuels up the boatmobile, and hightails it out of there with Patrick and Mr. Krabs. One character has been suspiciously absent the entire game, Sandy the squirrel. Well, it's time to visit her, and oh man, this is the worst level in the game by far. The premise is that Sandy is in her hibernation phase. Her house is full of snow and ice, and visibility is extremely limited. Apparently, Sandy has a flamethrower, and that actually does sound like it'd be useful, so SpongeBob and Patrick head over to retrieve it. Unfortunately, it's broken into 8 separate frozen pieces, and even worse, they're all strewn about the snowy wastes outside. With no visibility, there are no landmarks that allow you to gauge your position, which results in the player wandering around aimlessly, hoping that they stumble into one of the key items they need to continue progressing. Even worse, a giant hibernating Sandy is after you, and she'll freak out and kill you if you make too much noise or run too fast. I'm gonna be honest, this level was just so bad I skipped it. I cheated. I'm not ashamed. I was hours and hours into this game and I just wasn't interested. This level was a mistake, and the developers should re-release the game with it removed. That's how bad it is. Some of the other levels were boring, forgettable, or tedious, but none were this brutally mean to the player. It's just not okay. This isn't okay. It's not even fun to look at. It's just snow. They didn't even really make Sandy's treehouse. Honestly, this game would have been better if it was shorter. There are a lot of cool and diverse locations, and it's really fun to see these iconic SpongeBob set pieces realized in this hilarious, dark 3D first-person horror game. If the missions were half as long as they ended up being in the final game, I think it would have done a lot in terms of the game not overstaying its welcome. Sometimes less is more, and by cutting the length of the game in half, I really think that the remaining content could have been polished to a much more refined level. Anyway, after building the flamethrower and escaping Sandy, the crew rendezvous at the Krusty Krabs one final time before the final mission. However, they have the flamethrower, and Squidward has a device that can locate large quantities of jelly and goo. Wait, when did we get that? The group uses the device only to find that the big one, or the source of the jelly and menace, Alpha, is right on top of them. The green jellian summons all the evil jellyfish to the Krusty Krab, lifting it high into the air, or into the sea, rather. There are 4 segments to the final level, one for each character. First up is Mr. Krabs, who has a turret sequence. You shoot the jellyfish and protect yourself and Patrick. It's not that complicated. Eventually, Alpha appears and you shoot him to finish the phase. Things get harder over time, and if you shoot the gun for too long, it'll overheat, but otherwise it's not that complicated. It's definitely a cool sequence though, and definitely a fun one to watch. After stopping the initial assault of Jellians, the Krusty Krab is destroyed. Mr. Krab steals a car and takes the gang all the way off the edge to Rock Bottom, the most desolate, awful place in the ocean. This segment is really intense, really moody, and really scary. It reminds me a lot of the Funtime Foxy sequence in Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. As Squidward, we slowly walk down the road to the museum, the rest of the gang huddled together in the light behind you. Periodically, you'll hear tremors in the darkness, and utilizing a sound cue, you flash your light at the monster before it can, well, you probably know the drill by now. Additionally, you need to periodically flash the camera in front of you to check for the sea serpent thing. If it's there, you need to navigate around it, but using the flash too liberally will leave you vulnerable when the quakes start again. Even worse, if you flash the sea serpent too close, you're dead. In the museum, things start to go even more crazy. With our heroes' weapons proving ineffective against Alpha, they try to split up to find a solution. The next sequence has us controlling Patrick in what I would describe as the best boss fight in the entire game. I don't know why all the other boxing segments were so bad, but this one just feels right. It's fair, it's predictable, it takes some skill, and most importantly, it's fun and not frustrating. Maybe this far along into development, the team finally got a handle on designing cool boss fights for the boxing mechanics, but I wish there were more sequences that utilized these as well as this one. There's also this great moment at the start where it first looks like the nerd is going to be the big boss fight, and then it looks like it's going to be the bandit dude who burned down the bar, but then a piano falls on his head and Doodle Patrick is revealed as the true antagonist. Doodle Patrick catches our Patrick off guard, but before he can dispatch him, Doodle Bob comes to Patrick's defense. Doodle Bob has apparently developed some level of compassion for SpongeBob and Patrick and no longer wishes to see them destroyed. However, Doodle Patrick callously murders Doodle Bob, unaffected by his emotional plight. Patrick beats Doodle Bob up, and after a few bait-and-switch fake-outs, Patrick throws a match onto Doodle Patrick, setting him ablaze and burning him alive in a horrific arson murder. Also, again, aren't they underwater? How did Doodle Patrick burn to death from a match? Chaos is unfolding at the museum when suddenly SpongeBob spots a guitar. In a reference to the legendary SpongeBob SquarePants episode Band Geeks, SpongeBob prepares to do battle against Alpha using the guitar. In a final emotional embrace, Patrick begs SpongeBob not to go, worried that something will happen before he can apologize for not being a better friend. However, SpongeBob reassures Patrick, and the final battle against Alpha begins. It's okay. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. The mechanics are fair. You get a double jump, but it's pretty basic. Considering the amount of depth that a modern first-person free roam level provides, it's really hard to make a boss fight feel that compelling without spending a ton of money making it a massive spectacle. Obviously, that wasn't an option for these indie developers, and given that the game needs a final boss fight, they did a pretty good job. I do want to point out, though, that SpongeBob's guitar looks nothing like the one that they located in the museum, but whatever. Thankfully, the final boss has a couple of mid-fight checkpoints, so you aren't expected to do the entire thing on only 3 hearts, not necessarily at least. Upon finishing the fight, the group is in dire circumstances. SpongeBob is about to die. Even his GG guitar powers are not enough to stop Alpha. Recognizing that the only way to defeat him is from within, Mr. Krabs asks Squidward to lube him up.
Mr. Krabs, now is not the time for me to be your sex slave.
Mr. Krabs, now covered in mayonnaise, hurls himself into the jaws of Alpha. The mayonnaise causes a caustic reaction with Alpha's innards, causing them to evaporate in a horrific, dying agony. When the dust settles, SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick come to. They find the severed limbs and scattered remains of Mr. Krabs, who unfortunately did not survive the ordeal. He bravely gave his life to save everyone else, and the 3 stand in silent vigil of their fallen comrade. Eugene H. Krabs, the savior of Bikini Bottom, an inspiration to us all. However, if you complete the game with 100% completion, getting all the secret bonus items and completing all the challenges, we get a post-credits scene. 1 year after the tragic death of Mr. Krabs, the Krusty Krab is rebuilt and once again open for business. Squidward mans the register as always. SpongeBob rests in back, making the greatest Krabby Patties in all of the ocean. He glances fondly at a photo of the 4 of them, presumably taken during the events of the TV series, during happier times. In the final scene, the group stands together in an embrace, the late Eugene H. Krabs, known to his friends and staff as Mr. Krabs. Gone, but never forgotten. Press F to pay respects. Also, if you want to leave a comment pressing F to pay respects for Mr. Krabs, just be careful. The spam filter often doesn't approve of single character comments, so you may want to put something else in there too. But yeah, go for it. F's in the comments for Mr. Krabs. Oh, I guess Pearl did die. Wow, that was something else. I never imagined I'd be so emotionally impacted by a SpongeBob SquarePants parody indie horror fan game, but here we are, I guess. Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom is a really impressive game. It's honestly way more fun than many major releases I've played, yet it was made by a handful of people with basically no budget whatsoever. They knew going into the production of the game that they'd never be able to sell it, yet they made it anyway, and that's admirable. It's a complete, polished package. It's not broken, it's not unfinished, it's not terribly janky, it just kinda works. Part of what makes the game so fascinating and interesting is just how closely it ties itself to the established SpongeBob canon. Everything has a reference in this game. Even some of the smallest details from the show's plot make their way in some capacity, and that makes it all the more believable. This isn't just some indie horror game with a SpongeBob skin slapped on it. It was clearly designed from the ground up by a diehard SpongeBob fan, for SpongeBob fans, as a SpongeBob fan game. It's a SpongeBob game first and a horror game second, and I really appreciate that. Around the Clock at Bikini Bottom takes a concept that brought us comfort as children and distorts it into something far, far more horrifying. This is a really effective strategy for provoking an emotional response in people. By mixing terror with fond memories of our childhood, it takes us back to a more innocent, vulnerable mindset, and it allows horror to be more effective than it otherwise would. Things that might not scare us suddenly do, not because they're especially terrifying to look at, but because they provoke such discomfort in us. They taint our cherished memories and twist them into something horrifying yet still recognizable, and that is disturbing. This is why, despite the game's silliness, over-the-top sequences, and hilarious, clever dialogue, it still manages to be unnerving, off-putting. Diving into that tutorial level still gives me the shivers even now, and there were several moments where a jump scare caught me off guard and startled me, even when replaying levels. I encourage everyone to check the game out. You can download it for free on itch.io. I do warn you, if you have a 10th, 11th, or 12th gen Intel processor, read the instructions in the description for a fix. The game will crash every time otherwise. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider subscribing. Thanks.